Hello and welcome to Inside the Americas. Coming up in this edition, a motorway shootout in Mexico again throws the spotlight on the country's drugs trade and how it's becoming ever more closely linked to politics. Deadly protests in Peru as strikers denounce unfairness in the country's struggling mining sector. And tributes pour in for John Nash, the US mathematician immortalised in the film A Beautiful Mind. We start with another bloodbath in Mexico where 42 suspected drugs traffickers and a policeman were killed in a shootout on the motorway linking Mexico City and Guadalajara. It comes just a week after the assassination of a candidate in May's municipal elections in a region where the government's public enemy number one, the Nueva Generación cartel, has been expanding its influence. Our reporters Laurence Covillier and Matthew Comin sent this for Michoacán State, where organised crime and politics are increasingly intertwined.
Everyone's gathered to mourn one man, their hero, Enrique Hernandez, mayoral candidate for Yurecuaro, murdered a few days ago. It's a year since he'd armed fellow villagers to chase out the Knights Templar drug cartel. He dared publicly accuse the authorities of working with organised crime. Imprisoned last year, tortured but then released without evidence, he was well aware of the dangers.
As soon as I put down my weapons, I'll be a dead man. My enemies are the Templarios, but they are also corrupt officials from the Michoacán state government.
But he'd traded his weapons for a life in politics. His partner, Gloria, was by his side at a political meeting on May 14th when armed men killed him in a drive-by shooting.
He was walking along here when they started shooting. The impact of so many bullets kept him up. That stopped him falling to the ground. We're a block and a half away from the police station here. People tell us that when the police heard the gunshots, a man said to them, "Go, there's a shootout." But they all locked themselves in the police station. The truth is, we've never had an authority here to look after us.
Enrique Hernandez's team are struggling to find a new candidate just 2 weeks before the election. In this part of Mexico, going into politics means becoming a target for organised crime.
They approach candidates and they open briefcases full of money. And they say, "You're my candidate. I've chosen you. And when you're elected, you're going to vote for me on these issues like this, this, and that."
Here, voting instructions are given by men with guns and balaclavas. In this video shared online, a group orders people not to vote for the candidate from the current ruling party.
Everyone's living in uncertainty. We don't know who's behind who. It's all so mixed up. People might abstain from voting because they'll be too afraid. And this is just one video. We're going to see a lot more of this before the elections.
Unfortunately, he was right. 2 days later, 43 people were killed in a shootout just 5 kilometers from Yurecuaro. These upcoming elections, fraught with violence, are really going to test local people's belief in democracy.
Next to Peru and trouble in the country's mining sector as it battles declining global demand. 5 workers have been killed and dozens wounded in a series of clashes with security forces across the country, with authorities declaring a state of emergency in one southern province. Unions called an indefinite strike in mid-May, saying miners' rights were under threat from new legislation. France 24's Lucy Provan has details.
The miners of Peru will not be silenced. Across the country, the unions are calling for a general strike. They say recent changes by the government have limited their rights and taken away their benefits.
All we want is for labor rights to be respected.
In San Juan de Marcona, unrest at the Chinese company Shugang. Workers are striking against the sacking of 85 employees, and the local population is supporting them. The strikers are also demanding the installation of a system of drinking water in the area. Last week, the protests became riots and a civilian was killed. And it doesn't end there. In the southern region of Islay in Mollendo, protests against a new copper mining project. Demonstrators say it will lead to an ecological disaster. The mines use up enormous amounts of water and change the makeup of the soil, potentially contaminating it with lead, mercury, cadmium and arsenic. Here also, the protests became violent. At least 4 people have been killed in the last 2 months. The authorities have taken dramatic steps.
The government took the decision to declare a state of emergency in all the districts of the province of Islay and Mollendo for a period of 60 days.
Mining is very important to Peru. It represents 60% of the country's exports. But in the last 2 years, civil unrest has grown around this issue, and investments in mining have dropped by half. Peru is still counting on the industry to expand their economy by 4% this year.
Now, in Iran, Washington Post correspondent Jason Rezaian has gone on trial behind closed doors on espionage charges. He's in the dock alongside his wife Yegane Salehi and a woman described as a photojournalist. The trio accused of collecting confidential information for use in propaganda against the Islamic Republic. Rezaian's employers say the case against them is baseless, with US officials bemoaning a lack of transparency. The trial putting pressure on Washington's relationship with Tehran amid ongoing negotiations towards a deal on Iran's nuclear program. Elsewhere, tributes have been pouring in for American mathematician John Nash. Died after the 86-year-old was killed alongside his wife in a car crash. Nobel Prize winner in 1994, he became a household name following the film A Beautiful Mind starring Russell Crowe, which charted his struggle with mental illness. France 24's Olivia Salazar-Winspear reports.
One last honour for mathematician John Nash. On May 19th this year, he received the Abel Prize in Oslo, an accolade equivalent to the Nobel. Just 5 days later, he died in a car crash along with his wife. He was 86 years old. Nash's academic career started in chemistry, but quickly veered towards what was to be his life's work, mathematics. Studying at the Carnegie Institute of Technology and then Princeton University, he earned a doctorate based on equilibrium theory and non-cooperative games. His research then expanded into the theory of nonlinear partial differential equations. John Nash met his wife Alicia during a stint teaching at MIT, a position he was forced to abandon due to mental health problems in 1959. It was only after a considerable hiatus that Nash was able to return to mathematics, eventually winning a Nobel Prize in 1994 for his work on game theory, one of the most influential reflections on the dynamics of human competition. At the news of his death, Princeton University paid homage to John Nash.
John's remarkable achievements inspired generations of mathematicians, economists, and scientists who were influenced by his brilliant, groundbreaking work in game theory.
Groundbreaking work that inspired the Oscar-winning film A Beautiful Mind. The 2001 picture takes in Nash's genius and his battles with schizophrenia. Actor Russell Crowe, shown here on the set with Nash, took the leading role. He expressed his sadness at Nash's death on his Twitter account, sending his condolences to the family of what he called an amazing partnership.
Staying in the US finally, where blockbuster film San Andreas has got Californians trembling. Named after the giant fault which runs through the state, it's reawakened fears over the so-called Big One, the huge earthquake which experts predict could strike in the not-too-distant future.
San Francisco in flames. Buildings destroyed. Dams flooding the city. And all because of this. The San Andreas fault. This film is still a fantasy, but it reflects a real fear that one day what lies beneath these rocks may cause a devastating earthquake, the so-called Big One. Already in August last year, the strongest earthquake recorded here for 25 years, 6 on the Richter scale. Here in the Napa Valley north of San Francisco, 120 people were injured. Stories like Cheryl's are a sign of what might be to come when the Big One strikes.
It was an awful earthquake. It was 22 seconds long, which is a long earthquake. And we were all asleep. And the bed just went up and down. Then it went sideways, and I thought, okay, it's over. Then it was like somebody took and just shook the house like that.
Her house was shaken to its foundations.
The building was leaning over about 12 inches, and it was failing.
In the neighbourhood, many houses are raised off the ground. These wooden supports are supposed to better protect them from shocks. But even more recent constructions can be vulnerable. Here, in the south of San Francisco, a densely populated region close to high-risk zones, this rock formation is a fault, and it's a danger to the whole bay. Many of these buildings won't survive a shock. There's a spider's web of 100 faults like this all over California. Many pass underneath the city of San Francisco. A simulated alert for the big one. There will be very little time to react. This scientist is trying to predict the impact of the big one. Here, a seismic wave rolls in on the Silicon Valley.
And we're very close to the fault, so the black area is more than 1 meter per second of lateral motion.
San Francisco has seen waves like this before, in 1906 and 1989, but there's been progress since. Bridges are now reinforced and can support very strong shocks. But for the ex-mayor who was in power in 1989, the worst is still impossible to foresee.
The worst scenario is a 8.2 or 8.5 earthquake, which overwhelms any capacity for any city to withstand it. It just overwhelms what we know today in terms of building standards.
Scientists can't predict the precise scale of the big one or know where exactly it will strike, but they do say it could happen between now and 2030.
And that's it for this edition. Thanks for watching, and do join us again next week.